It was still dark when I heard her knock, gentle at first, then desperate. My daughter never comes to my room that early. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. "Mom," she whispered, "please don't go to work today. Just trust me." I wanted to laugh it off, but her hands were shaking. And when I asked why, she just said, "You'll understand by noon." I didn't understand then. But by 11:30, when the police called, I realized she had saved my life. If you've ever ignored a warning that came from someone you love, don't. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because what happened that day changed everything I believed about fear, family, and fate. There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a house when something terrible is about to happen. It's not the peaceful quiet of early morning or the comfortable hush of a sleeping home. No, this was different. This was the kind of silence that doesn't sound empty, but watched. Like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something awful to unfold. I remember lying there in my bed, staring at the ceiling as the 5 a.m. light crept through my curtains like fingers reaching into a tomb. Outside, there was this faint mist hanging over everything, the kind that makes the world look like it's dissolving at the edges. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since my husband died, that crawling sensation that tells you your life is about to change forever, and not for the better. When my daughter appeared in my doorway, I could see it in her face immediately. This wasn't confusion or a bad dream. This was certainty. Pure, terrifying certainty. Her face showed the kind of terror that comes from knowing exactly what's going to happen and being powerless to stop it, except for this one desperate plea. Her voice came out in half whispers, broken and raw from crying. "Mom, please. Please don't go to work today. I know it sounds crazy, but you have to trust me." The way she said it, with her hands trembling like autumn leaves in a storm, it cut right through me. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything was going to be okay, but something deep in my gut was screaming that it wasn't. You know that feeling when your motherly instinct starts fighting with logic? When every rational part of your brain is telling you one thing, but every cell in your body is telling you something else entirely. That's where I was, caught between wanting to dismiss her fears and this growing dread that maybe, just maybe, she knew something I didn't. I sat up in bed and pulled her close, feeling how her whole body was shaking. "Baby, what's wrong? Did you have a nightmare?" But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't about dreams. This was about something real, something that had been building in the shadows of our lives while I was too busy surviving to notice. To understand what happened that morning, you have to understand the life we'd been living since my husband died. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet desperation that comes from trying to hold everything together with nothing but willpower and stubbornness. I was working long hours, sometimes 12-hour days, just to keep the house, just to make sure my daughter had what she needed. The grief was still so fresh, so raw, that most days I felt like I was drowning in it. My daughter had always been quiet, artistic, the kind of child who saw the world differently than everyone else. But lately, she'd been different. More distant. More distracted. I'd catch her staring out windows with this haunted look in her eyes, like she was watching for something that hadn't happened yet, but definitely would. Looking back now, I realized there had been signs. Small things that my exhausted, grieving brain had dismissed as coincidence or paranoia. Like that strange car that had been parked near our home 2 nights in a row, a dark sedan with tinted windows that didn't belong to any of our neighbors. I'd noticed it, felt that little prick of unease, but told myself I was being ridiculous. Then there were the phone calls. I'd catch my daughter whispering into her phone late at night, and when she hung up, she'd be crying. Not the dramatic tears of teenage heartbreak, but the quiet, desperate kind of crying that comes from carrying a weight too heavy for your shoulders. When I asked her about it, she'd just say it was nothing, that she was fine, but her eyes told a different story. And then there was the letter. The one from my husband that I'd never opened, hidden away in my dresser drawer like a bomb waiting to explode. He'd written it before he died, sealed it with instructions that I should only open it if something happened at his company. At the time, I thought it was just his paranoia, his way of trying to control things even after death. Now I realize it was his way of trying to protect us from something he saw coming but couldn't stop. But I was too lost in my own grief to see the patterns, too busy trying to survive each day to notice that my daughter was slowly falling apart with knowledge she couldn't share. So there I was that morning, sitting on the edge of my bed with my daughter trembling in my arms, asking myself the question that would change everything: was I really about to cancel work over a child's nightmare? My rational mind was screaming at me. I couldn't afford to miss work. We needed every penny I could earn. My boss was already frustrated with my occasional absences due to grief and family obligations. Missing a day without a real emergency could cost me my job, and losing my job could cost us everything. But there was another voice, quieter but more insistent, that kept whispering, "What if she's right? What if something terrible is about to happen?" It wasn't logical. It wasn't practical. But it was there, growing stronger with every passing second. I looked at my daughter's face, really looked at it, and saw something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't the face of a child having an irrational fear. This was the face of someone who had seen into the future and was desperate to change it. The way she was looking at me, with such desperate hope mixed with absolute terror, it was like she was watching me make a choice between life and death. Maybe she just needs me home, I thought. Maybe that's what this is really about. But even as I tried to convince myself it was that simple, I knew it wasn't. There was something bigger happening here, something that had been building for weeks or maybe months while I was too blind to see it. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and texted my manager, "Personal emergency. Can't make it today." The words felt both terrifying and liberating. I was choosing to trust my daughter over my own judgment, choosing love over logic, choosing to believe in something I couldn't understand. When I hit send, my daughter didn't relax. She didn't smile or seem relieved. Instead, she just whispered, "Thank you," in a voice so small and broken that it nearly destroyed me. And in that moment, I realized that whatever was coming, whatever she was trying to protect me from, it was far from over. The hours that followed were unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Time seemed to stretch and contract, each minute feeling like an hour while the morning flew by in a blur of anxiety and dread. The clock on my nightstand became my enemy, its steady ticking counting down to something neither of us wanted to name. Every sound in the house was amplified to an almost unbearable degree. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a freight train. A dog barking somewhere in the distance made us both jump. The wind creaking against the windows felt like fingers scratching at the glass, trying to get in. The air itself felt thick and heavy, like the atmosphere before a terrible storm. My daughter moved through the house like a ghost, constantly checking the clock, constantly looking out windows, constantly listening for something only she could hear. She wouldn't tell me what she was waiting for, but I could see in her eyes that she knew exactly when it would happen. She was counting down to something specific, something that had a precise time and place. I tried to make normal conversation, tried to pretend this was just a regular day off, but we both knew better. There was an invisible countdown happening, a timer ticking towards something that would change everything. The air itself felt like it was waiting for something, holding its breath for the moment when our world would explode. At 11:30 a.m., the phone rang. Unknown number. My daughter's head snapped up, her face going even paler than before. She looked at me with eyes full of fear and something that might have been relief. Like she'd been waiting for this call, dreading it but knowing it had to come. I answered with a voice that sounded steadier than I felt. "Hello. Ma'am, this is Officer Hale with the Metro Police. Are you Mrs. Saracen?" The voice was calm, professional, but there was something underneath it that made my stomach drop. "Yes, this is Sarah. Ma'am, are you aware of the incident at your workplace today?" The world seemed to tilt sideways. "Incident? What kind of incident?" "There's been an explosion on your floor at Henning Corporation. The blast occurred at approximately 11:15 this morning. We're calling to verify the whereabouts of all employees who were scheduled to work today. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. An explosion. At my workplace. At the exact time I would have been there if I'd gone to work. If my daughter hadn't begged me to stay home. Your employee ID was used to enter the building at 8:03 a.m. this morning, the officer continued. Security footage shows your car in the parking lot. But the explosion originated near your workstation, and we need to confirm. That's impossible, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I'm at home. I never went to work today. There was a pause. Ma'am, can you verify your current location? Because our records show. I'm at home, I repeated, stronger this time. I called in sick this morning. I have the text message to prove it. I never left my house. Another pause, longer this time. Ma'am, we're going to need you to stay exactly where you are. We'll be sending officers to your location immediately. Do not leave your home. Do not answer the door for anyone except uniformed police officers with proper identification. The line went dead. I stood there, phone in my hand, staring at my daughter who was watching me with those knowing, terrified eyes. She had saved my life. Somehow, someway, my 16-year-old daughter had known that if I went to work today, I would die. Before I could even begin to process what the officer had told me, there was another knock at the door. Not frantic like my daughter's had been that morning, but slow, steady, controlled. The kind of knock that suggests someone has all the time in the world and knows exactly what they're doing. My daughter gasped and immediately hid behind me, her small hands gripping my shoulders like claws. Mom, she whispered, her voice barely audible, don't answer it. I approached the door slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. I peered through the peephole and saw a man in plain clothes standing on my porch. He had a badge visible on his belt, but something about him felt wrong. His smile was too wide, too practiced, and it didn't reach his eyes at all. He looked directly at the peephole, like he knew I was watching, and his smile grew wider. Mrs. Chin? I'm Detective Morrison. I need to speak with you about the incident at your workplace. My daughter's grip on my shoulders tightened. That's not the police, Mom, she whispered urgently. That's not the police. How do you know? I whispered back, but even as I asked, I could feel it too. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Real police would have come in uniforms, in marked cars, in pairs. This man was alone, in civilian clothes, with a smile that made my skin crawl. Mrs. Chin, I know you're in there. We really need to talk. It's about your husband's connection to what happened today. My husband. How did he know about my husband? The officer on the phone hadn't mentioned my husband at all. And my husband had been dead for 2 years. What could he possibly have to do with an explosion at my workplace? But my daughter knew. Looking at her face, I could see that she knew exactly what this man wanted and exactly why he was here. The terror in her eyes wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Mom, we need to get away from the door. Now. Her voice was urgent but controlled, like she'd been preparing for this moment. As we backed away from the front door, my daughter began to speak in a rush, the words tumbling out like a dam had finally burst. Mom, I heard something a few days ago. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard you on the phone with someone from Dad's old work. But after you hung up, the phone rang again, and I answered it because I thought it might be important. She was crying now, but she kept talking. It was a man, and he was talking to someone else, not to me. He didn't know I was on the line. He said something about the company needing a scapegoat, and he mentioned your name. He said the accident had to look real, and that you'd be the perfect fall person because of your connection to Dad. My legs nearly gave out. What connection? What are you talking about? I went through Dad's desk afterward, the one you keep locked in the basement. I found documents, Mom. Papers with your name on them, connected to some kind of secret transfer worth millions of dollars. And there were emails between Dad and his boss, talking about how they needed to make sure the evidence never came to light. The room was spinning. Baby, that doesn't make sense. Your father worked in accounting. He didn't have access to millions of dollars. No, Mom, he did. He was involved in something big, something that his company was trying to cover up. And they needed someone to blame when it all came out. Someone who couldn't defend themselves. Her voice broke. They killed Dad, Mom. And they were going to kill you too. The pieces were starting to come together in a horrifying picture. My husband hadn't died in a random car accident. He'd been murdered. And now they were trying to tie up loose ends by framing me for some kind of corporate disaster and then eliminating me in the process. How long have you known? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I found the first documents 3 weeks ago. But I didn't understand what they meant until I heard that phone call. And then yesterday, I found something else. She ran to the kitchen and came back with a manila folder. I found a file on Dad's old laptop. He'd been building evidence against his own company before he died. He knew they were planning something, and he was trying to expose them. Inside the folder were printouts of emails, financial records, and what looked like surveillance photos. My husband had been documenting criminal activity at his workplace, and according to the dates on the documents, he'd been planning to go to the authorities just days before he died. The file was titled Insurance Policy, my daughter continued. And there was a note that said if anything happened to him, you would be next because they'd use your name on the fake accounts he'd discovered. I felt like I was drowning in revelation after revelation. My quiet, careful husband had been living a double life, secretly gathering evidence of corporate corruption while putting his family in danger. And somehow, my teenage daughter had pieced it all together while I remained completely oblivious. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. Because I was scared you wouldn't believe me. And because I was scared that if I told you, they'd know that I knew and they'd hurt you faster. She was sobbing now. I've been trying to figure out what to do for weeks. And then this morning, I just knew. I just knew that if you went to work today, you weren't coming home. The knocking at the door had stopped, but I could see movement outside through the windows. More cars were arriving. Not police cars, unmarked sedans with tinted windows. The same kind of car that had been parked near our house for the past few nights. We need to leave, I said, my survival instincts finally kicking in. Right now. But my daughter was already moving. I know. I packed a bag for both of us. It's in the back closet. And I found something else of Dad's. She handed me a small key. He had a safety deposit box key in his desk. I looked up the bank. There might be more evidence there. We moved quickly through the house, grabbing the bag my daughter had packed and whatever else we could carry. I went at my husband's desk and pulled out a letter I'd been avoiding for 2 years, the sealed letter he'd left with instructions to open only if something happened at his company. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper in my husband's careful handwriting. Sarah, if you're reading this, then they've made their move. I've been documenting criminal activity at Henning Corp for months. They're using the company to launder money for people who kill to protect their secrets. If anything happens at the company, you'll be blamed. I've set up accounts in your name to make it look like you're involved. Trust no one from the inside. Take Emma and go to the farmhouse. Everything you need to expose them is in the safety deposit box. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this. I love you both. Michael. The farmhouse. My husband's family's old property, 50 miles outside the city. He'd always called it Plan B, but I'd never understood what he meant. My daughter was watching my face as I read. I found that letter 2 days ago, she said quietly. That's when I knew for sure that today was the day. I could feel it. We slipped out the back door as quietly as we could. The men in suits were focused on the front of the house, apparently still trying to decide how to approach. We made it to our car in the garage and backed out slowly, keeping the headlights off until we were several blocks away. As we drove toward the highway, I could see smoke rising from the direction of downtown. The explosion at my workplace was real. If I had gone to work today, if my daughter hadn't trusted her instincts and begged me to stay home, I would be dead right now. Either killed in the blast or murdered by the men who had come to our house. In the glove compartment, I found another surprise my husband had left for us, a flash drive marked Truth in his handwriting. I knew without looking that it contained all the evidence he'd been gathering, all the proof of what Henning Corporation had been doing. My daughter was crying quietly in the passenger seat. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner, Mom. I'm sorry Dad got involved in this. I'm sorry our whole life has been a lie." I reached over and took her hand. "Baby, you saved our lives. Your father tried to protect us the only way he knew how, and you finished what he started. You have nothing to apologize for. But I was the one who should be apologizing. For not seeing the signs. For not reading the letter sooner. For not realizing that my husband's death wasn't an accident and that we'd been living in danger for 2 years." As we drove through the night toward the farmhouse, I kept thinking about all the small moments I'd dismissed. My husband's increasing paranoia in the months before he died. His insistence on setting up hidden accounts and emergency plans. His repeated warnings about not trusting anyone from his company. I'd thought it was stress, maybe early signs of mental illness brought on by work pressure. I'd never imagined he was trying to save our lives. The farmhouse was exactly as my husband had left it, dusty and abandoned looking from the outside, but fully stocked with supplies inside. There was a generator, canned food, bottled water, and a secure internet connection. He'd been planning for this day, preparing for the moment when we'd need to disappear and fight back. I plugged in the flash drive and started uploading files to every news outlet and law enforcement agency I could think of. Financial records showing millions of dollars in illegal transactions. Email chains discussing the elimination of problems. Surveillance footage of meetings between Henning Corporation executives and known criminals. Photos of documents that proved the company had been operating as a criminal enterprise for years. And most damning of all, recorded phone conversations between my husband and his boss, where the boss explicitly discussed framing me for their crimes and then arranging for me to die in a workplace accident. As the upload bar slowly filled, I sat with my daughter and finally understood what had happened that morning. She hadn't been warning me out of fear, she'd been warning me out of love. She'd carried this terrible knowledge for weeks, protecting me the only way she knew how, waiting for the right moment to save my life. That day taught me something I'll never forget, I whispered as we watched the files upload. Sometimes our children carry the instincts we've long buried in ourselves. You weren't warning me out of fear. You were warning me out of love. My daughter hugged me tight. "I just didn't want to lose you too, Mom. I couldn't let them take you like they took Dad." And in that moment, I realized that we'd both been protecting each other in the only ways we knew how. My husband had tried to shield us from the truth of what he was doing. I'd tried to shield my daughter from the reality of our financial struggles and my grief. And my daughter had tried to shield me from the knowledge that would have terrified me if I'd known it sooner. But love, real love, isn't about shielding people from the truth. It's about trusting them with the truth, even when it's dangerous. Even when it's terrifying. Even when it means admitting that the world is more dangerous and complicated than you want it to be. The upload finished just as the sun was rising. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear sirens. Not coming for us, but heading toward the city where Henning Corporation's world was about to collapse. My husband's evidence would expose not just the company, but an entire network of corruption that reached into law enforcement, politics, and business. My daughter and I sat on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sunrise and knowing that our old life was over forever. But for the first time in 2 years, I felt like we might actually have a future. Not the future I'd planned, not the safe, quiet life I'd thought we were living, but a real future built on truth instead of lies. "What happens now?" my daughter asked. "Now we rebuild," I said. "But this time, we do it together. No more secrets. No more protecting each other from the truth. We face whatever comes next as a team." She nodded and leaned against my shoulder. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. And I'm so proud of you for being brave enough to save us both." If you've ever felt a strange warning from someone you love, don't ignore it. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Because sometimes love is the warning